I'm positive.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game, and we will be doing lots of politics and public policy. Well, really more public policy than politics, I would say, this evening, because we have as our guest John Tillman. He, of course, is the CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. He has been there now, we're saying, almost 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
Okay, he's grown this organization from, I don't know, from like, it was nothing, $200 to about, your budget is now, or the budget's approaching $4 million, right?
Well, our budget's this year $1.8 million, but we should raise somewhere between $3 and $4 million this year.
So next year the budget will be $4 million.
That's a possibility.
So your accusers would say, John, you're just doing what you accuse the government doing. They just grow to grow. I mean, you know.
Well, the difference is
we can make this $10 million, and so you can be the emperor. I mean, and we should say that's all kidding. That is just kidding, because John Tillman has just gotten a major award, which we'll talk about during the show. That's our tease. All right, so, but seriously, somebody might say you do seem to be growing to grow.
We are growing, but the growth with purpose, with voluntary investors who choose to invest in the plan that we've laid out for them. That's the key difference between us and government. Government confiscates money from people who are unwilling to give the exorbitant amount they're taking. We make a presentation that we want to advance the ball for liberty. We want to champion the free market system and try to do our part to get that into public policy and passed into law here in Illinois. And we're building capacity to do that. The other side, the unions, public employee unions, private sector unions, all the people that are advocates for government have massive resources. We are a drop in the bucket in comparison, and we need every dollar, and I recommend anybody who has resources should send us a contribution right now.
Yeah, well, but John, the thing of it is, I mean, you're here in Illinois, and you've been pitching this for 4 years, almost 4 years, and it is still a Democratic majority in the House, Democratic majority in the Senate, Democratic governor, and I know you're not partisan. You're nonpartisan, right?
So the Institute is definitely nonpartisan.
So it's not that they're Democrat or Republican, but the majorities that are there are generally in favor of more spending, more taxes, more government. So in 4 years, what accomplishments could you say, this is solid, this is what we've done to have an impact on policy in Illinois?
Oh, that's a great question, and the short answer is, first of all, the Republicans have better numbers today than they did 4 years ago. It's a 54-seat minority in the House versus 48, or even less than that, I think, 4 years ago. I think the Republicans in the Senate are up around 24 seats. They were down around 22 seats. There was a supermajority against them.
But just interrupt to say, it was 37-22, it's now 35-24 in the state Senate.
Right.
I mean, that 4 years, that's your progress, so it's going to take another 14 years to get a majority?
Jeff, you have to let someone actually finish the full question. Right. I was trying to actually give you the political landscape and the improvement. So you had a very challenging gubernatorial race that held down the overall results. But in Illinois, you also had 5 Republicans gain seats in the congressional delegation, unprecedented. So there were markers politically that have improved things. But the more important thing that's going on in the state is the movement towards the ideas that we advocate. We advocate a very simple agenda: free markets, limited government, liberty for individuals. Our goal is to empower people to pursue opportunity and pursue their dreams. The other side wants to empower government to decide how everything should be done in society and put everything through what I call the government paradigm. In terms of changing the mindset in this state, where we are today versus where we were 4 years ago, we absolutely are way down the road. The fact that the political process in 2010 didn't take us all the way there is because that's out of our control, and our goal is to improve our influence of that in areas of work we do outside of the Institute.
So you're way down the road, you say. You mean way down the road, you've got a long way to go?
I wrote a plan in 2007. That was a targeted plan for 2014, so we're partway through that plan. Many other people are involved in this. I'm just one guy of many people trying to advance the free market system here in Illinois. You know, Illinois is in an economic death spiral, Jeff. We have gone from being one of the great economic powerhouses that was, you know, strode across the Midwest. We invented the skyscraper, we built the tallest buildings, manufacturing giant, agricultural giant, energy giant, a transportation hub. We are losing our market position on all those things and have been for 30 years through both Democrats and Republicans, because we've become a government-centric state rather than a free market-centric state. And what we're doing, we're in the middle of a process to try to change that. And just to give people a sense of the timing of this, remember that the American Revolution, we think of 1776, the seeds of that were sown by people out of sight and out of mind to those who were writing and talking and doing the version of that back then that you and I are doing now in the 1760s and early 1770s. And then in 1776, remember, that Constitution didn't get passed until 1787. So this took a long time, and we're in the middle of that process right now.
This is the Constitution.
The U.S. Constitution.
Okay. You
yes.
carry one in your pocket?
I don't have one with me today,
need
but
to carry one all
I
the
should
time,
carry it with me
John.
all the time.
Okay, I mean, don't leave home without it. That's our slogan here, the U.S. Constitution.
Absolutely.
And probably ought to take a look at the Illinois Constitution.
I have looked at the Illinois Constitution. It's not a very good one.
Yeah, so you'd like to change that.
There's many things I'd like to change.
But you'd like to
about
keep the U.S. Constitution
the
the way
U.S.
it is?
Constitution is pretty darn good, especially as amended.
And should it be amended to include a balanced budget amendment?
I'm more interested, I think that's important, but I'm much more interested in a spending cap. The key to restraining the growth of government is limiting its resources to spend. So Illinois theoretically has a balanced budget requirement. It's a fake balanced budget requirement, and we have deficit spending every year. And you could actually have a balanced budget and have government growing out of control by confiscating more and more resources from the private sector. You know, what's going on in the country today, the two, what I like to call the two paradigms, are clearly aligned. On the one side, you have the progressive paradigm. You have the public employee unions, private sector unions, nonprofits who all benefit from government, all the people that work in government, and they have a unifying goal, which is to extract as much money. Oh, and the trial lawyers, let's not forget them, they're in there too. And their number one goal is to extract as much money and resources from the private sector as possible to run it through their business operations, which is government, unions, and the trial bar. Versus the private sector, which are people out there, small business folks trying to start a business, big business folks, and everybody in between. They don't have a unifying purpose, and that's why the other side has some advantages. The difference is that what they want to do is they want to take those resources and run it through government because that's how their business runs. What we want to do is empower individuals to pursue their dreams and protect those resources. That's the way things are lined up right now, and we'll see what happens in 2012. It'll be interesting.
So you're saying that those paradigms exist both on the federal level and the state level?
Absolutely.
Illinois is your prototypical example on the
Yes,
state
it
level.
is. That's what's happened over time.
Much more than any other states, they are sort of the Keynesian state
Yes.
of the United States.
I would say that's true.
They
along
think
with a few
spending.
others.
They think the way to get jobs here in Illinois is to expand government. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And to run jobs through government programs. And a perfect illustration of that is the way they talk about the McCormick deal and the jobs that are associated with McCormick, the tollway deal that's being discussed right now. All the jobs they talk about.
$12 billion.
$12 billion.
It's going to create a lot of jobs. Is Governor Paquin wrong? I mean, the Republicans are signing on to it. State Republican leader, Illinois minority leader, Christine Radogno, has said it's a $12.1 billion program. Now, she said it shouldn't have been that much, but he didn't hear her say that how much it should be.
That's one of the problems is when Republicans always talk about the degree of the size of exorbitant government, then you're just arguing on the margins for what the other side wants. Now, having said that, that was a conceptual point, not so much specific to the tollway. The tollway, I think, is a very interesting point because I believe we need infrastructure. There's no question this state needs infrastructure, but it has to be done in a transparent, logical way. To raise tolls now, at this moment in time, when this state just led the nation, we just issued a report that showed that Illinois led the nation since the tax hike in January, led the nation in job losses, 89,000 in terms of the number of people employed.
And where can people find that, John?
They can find it at illinoispolicy.org. It's one of the main things right on our front page right now. 89,000 jobs, 3 months in a row of higher unemployment by a different measure of unemployment. We're at 9.5%, which is above the national average.
Which is 9.2%, I think, right?
I thought it was 9.5%.
No, I mean the national average is
9.2. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
The state, but the Illinois
Yes.
is 9.5, so now it's above.
Yes,
we
we're
weren't
above.
always in the last year.
In fact,
We're going
we're up, but our trend line is up since the tax hike, which we predicted and many others did, because on the net basis, job creators and people who are looking for opportunity are leaving this state to find opportunity in our neighboring states and around the country. But the key point of the tollway idea is that it's $12 billion now with the idea of running jobs through a government building program. And we do need infrastructure. But think about the mindset. The mindset of Governor Quinn is, what can I do with government to create jobs by taking money from the private sector, running it through government, as I said earlier, and then having that whole job creation program, as opposed to lowering the cost of government, reducing the speed bumps and roadblocks and the friction for an entrepreneur to start a business and create a job in the private sector.
Somebody like Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, you know, because she's not far from where you live.
Yes, she is, in fact, my congresswoman.
Or are you? She is.
Yes,
You're
I'm
in the
her
9th
district.
Congressional District.
Yes.
You live in Gulf?
I live in the village of Gulf, yes.
Okay, and so you're represented by Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky.
Yes.
And she was on just this morning talking, I think it was Fox News Chicago, the Sunday morning show. That's a good show with our good friends Dane Placco, who's been here, and Mike Flannery. And she's talking about what? She's talking about how the way to do this, John, and I think she would probably say you just don't get it. And we wish Congresswoman Schakowsky to be here. She hasn't been here, not through our fault, for the last 7 years. But she used to come here every year, and we had really good shows because she's a strong woman with strong ideas. But she would say the way to do it is to tax these billionaires and billionaires who've got way too much money. And you know what? And these big corporations, she said, they're just sitting on oodles and oodles of money. And there's no demand. So they won't invest it because there's no demand. There are no customers. So if you have these jobs, these $12 billion of jobs from the state, maybe matched by the federal government, even more, well, then you're going to hire a lot of construction workers. You're going to hire a lot of road builders. Those families are going to prosper. They're going to buy more and spend more. And the Keynesian cycle works again.
Well,
Does the Congresswoman not get it?
That would be correct. She does not get it, because what she doesn't understand is that when you go and extend a highway or add a lane to a highway or fill a pothole in a highway or replace a bridge in a highway, that is not transformative and doesn't have a real, what economists call a multiplier effect. It's a very marginal improvement.
Sure.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Whereas when we built the original interstate highway system in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, that was transformative infrastructure because it reduced the friction to commerce by building an entire infrastructure of highways. Now all we're talking about is maintaining it and improving it. This is very different kind of investment than private sector investment. Remember, once you build the highway, those workers, and those are good jobs. I'm not saying those aren't good jobs or important jobs. That's why I believe in infrastructure. But that is not the root source. The source is an entrepreneur who says, you know what, I think I'm going to create an application for the iPhone that will let a guy who's going to drive a truck on that highway bring product from one place to another place, less cost, so that the manufacturer who makes that product can get it to market cheaper and thus compete with the Chinese who are trying to take his jobs away. And when she talks about taking the money from billionaires and millionaires, what she first of all doesn't understand, there's not enough money there. You could take now think about this, every dollar that a billionaire, anybody making over $250,000 a year, which is the threshold they're using, you could take 100% of that marginal income and
Of
run
the so-called rich people.
So-called rich people, and it would run the government, I think, for about 6 months. I might have the number off slightly, but the basic
I
principle
thought it was
is
3
there.
months, but
Whichever. I mean, my point.
taxes.
I'm admitting that I may have
It's
the number off
stronger again,
slightly,
yeah.
but the point is, it will run the government for a very brief period of time. There's not enough money there. The key to the whole thing is to encourage entrepreneurship, both at the top and bottom of the economic cycle.
have you discussed this with Congresswoman Schakowsky?
I've never received a phone call from her for
Really? As a
for
constituent?
coffee. No, she's not interested in chatting with me.
But you would like to do that?
I'd love to have a chat with her.
Because you are heading up the Illinois Policy Institute.
Yeah.
You have spent the last 4 years of your life in advocacy.
Yes, I
the
have.
prior 30 years in sales and sales management and so forth,
Mm-hmm.
and overseeing these people and managing them. You know what you're doing. You have an undergraduate degree from Wayne State University.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you think that Congresswoman Schakowsky would say, well, let's talk with John Tillman, as we're doing, and let's have some give and take? What if you were both here on the show at the same time? Would that be ideal?
I'd love to have that show. That'd be so fun. And one of the reasons that
You're invited, Congresswoman Schakowsky. Let me know when you'll be on and talk with John Tillman.
one of the reasons I think she's not going to take that invitation up is because she has a settled point of view. She is absolutely certain she is correct in spite of the facts. What's so interesting to me is we have a lot of evidence about whether or not her point of view works or whether or not the free market point of view I'm discussing works. The evidence is clear. It's much better to lower the cost of government, create incentives for people to create jobs. Let me put this in simple terms. People like Congressman Schakowsky always love the entrepreneur when they're in the garage, when they're in their basement starting the business. But God forbid they become wealthy. Then she hates them and wants to confiscate all their money. I think that's an outrage.
You're saying she's penalizing success.
That's exactly right.
All right, but and I think this argument about how construction and road building will, do terribly good things to stimulate the economy is probably taken to the illogical extreme by Mike Barnacle. I think he substitutes on hardball.
Sure.
I think he's old sports writer, and he said this is sort of a dark cloud, I think, but I think he meant a silver lining in the cloud. We're taping this on August 28th, 2011, and as we speak, Hurricane Irene is roaring through the East Coast.
Right.
I would think most people would think that's not a good thing.
Right.
If we could put a shield up that just stopped it, we'd want to stop that, right?
Right.
Especially if we could do it at low cost.
Are you going to talk about the broken windows fallacy?
No, I was saying Barnacle said, hey, the good thing here is that, it's going to knock over a lot of buildings, it's going to do a lot of damage, and then we'll have to go in and do repairs and maintenance and construction, and that may stimulate the economy.
That's absolutely the most preposterous and stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, and people try to say that over and over again. Here's why.
But he's on hardball, and I'm doing this show. John, is the world just?
No, the world's not just. You should be having that show on Hardball.
Right.
It could be Hardball with Jeff, but
Okay.
and you should have it. I would watch that show more than I watch Hardball.
So explain to me, what
But here's
might
why
get
that's
it
really
wrong.
stupid. Let's just pick a random building that Mr. Barnacle is talking about that's been knocked over and going to be rebuilt. The owner of that building and whatever he was doing inside that building is now out of business. And so during that time, when he's repairing that business, what he had was software engineers who were developing a new software application that would allow the manufacturer down the street to produce more units per labor hour, keeping union workers working and competing with the Chinese. Now, because his building's been knocked down, that software is not going to get developed, and that manufacturer down the street, those union workers are going to be out of work because the Chinese are going to get ahead of them and take market share away from them. I know this to be true because I once had my roof collapse on my business, and let me tell you, I had to repair that. It took me 6 months. It almost bankrupted me. I know that it doesn't work the way Mr. Barnacle talks about, because you divert resources from building your business to trying to survive and get back into business. It's a preposterous idea.
All right, destruction is not usually the way to boost the economy.
No.
But let's switch over, because I think one of the main things you do, you've just been talking about the free market, talking about liberty, talking about the contrast between, as you say, the Keynesian paradigm and the liberty or free market paradigm, right? On the national level and state level. But another area where that comes into play, and I know the Illinois Policy Institute does a lot in this area, is education.
Right.
So currently on August 28th, the raging debate, sort of, is the Chicago public school system. Because Rahm Emanuel, really, he did a bit, his school board, the one he wants there, decided that they could do this under the contract that they have with the Chicago Teachers Union. They could say the 4% increase, you were getting a certain increase, but at the 4% additional increase in salaries for the teachers there, we could stop from going ahead because we have a $700 million deficit, I think, in the city, or perhaps both as well as in the city, but the Chicago public school budget, which is separate. Mm-hmm. In any case, so no 4% increase in salaries that the teachers were expecting, and he said, but then they thought about it for a while and said, well, actually, we'll give you 2% back. You can have a 2% increase, but you're going to have to give 30% more of the school day. I think it'll go from like 5.5 hours to 7 hours, something like that. Mm-hmm. So teachers would get a 2% increase in salary, but they'd give 30% additional time. Karen Lewis, the Chicago Teacher Union, said basically that's really disrespecting teachers. But it was also odd because a lot of people said teachers are really spending this time anyway. They spend oodles and oodles of time, and now they'll just get paid for it, even though it's only 2%. So that could have been an argument. I don't know if Ron tried that one, but in any case, so there's a stalemate here. Maybe there'll be a strike.
There's so much.
So what's wrong? Let's cut right to the meat, because we only got about 12 minutes left. What can you say in the Illinois Policy Institute that clarifies what's going on and makes it useful?
It shows that for the teachers, it's not about for the teachers union. There are many amazing teachers in the Chicago public school system, some of them who would go for that deal in a heartbeat because they care deeply about trying to change children's lives for the better. But the bottom line is those teachers, the good ones, as well as those that are riding the system, are represented by Karen Lewis in the Chicago Teachers Union. And what it says is that they care more about money than they care about the children. They care more about money than they care about the children. She's quoting the fact that the marginal rate per hour they'd be paid is $3.61 or some obscure number like that. And she thinks conservatives and Republicans only care about money when she's making it all about the money. And this in the situation where the Chicago teachers have classroom time less than any other major school system in the country. Kids going to school in Chicago end up having fewer classroom days by about a year's total class time, I think it is, compared to a kid in Houston, Texas. Houston schools are outperforming Chicago schools, just to give you some illustration. Everybody says, southern schools don't do well. Houston is beating Chicago. And we spend $5.6 billion, I think it is, for roughly 7,000 students. That's roughly $15,000 per student. Let me ask you something. If you and I were to take 15 students, that's $225,000. Do you think we could take 15 students for $225,000 a year, pay a teacher $100,000, use $125,000 to pay for the rest of everything that they need, including the space?
We could do a pretty good job.
We could do a pretty damn good job. And it's an outrageous thing for Karen Lewis to make it about the money when it's children's lives that are at stake. A kid going to school in Chicago is more likely to go to jail, a boy, than he is to graduate from college. That's what she should be focused on.
But is Rahm Emanuel doing the right thing? In your view, will the hour and a half of additional
Absolutely,
time make a
he's
major
doing the right
difference?
thing. Time in classroom makes a tremendous difference, and I think he's doing absolutely the right thing
What
in this
could he
area.
do additionally? If you had Rom here right now and you were
I think
talking
he
to
should
him,
totally open up vouchers. He's very anti-voucher, but if he wants to hold, he's made it clear he wants to hold Chicago public school system and their teachers and the whole entire system accountable. The best way to hold them accountable is to take away their monopoly control of children's lives and let private providers compete with the public monopoly through vouchers, a bill that we were involved with Senator Meeks last year that came close to passing but did not pass. Now, Rom is against vouchers.
that was a very modest proposal, right?
It was a very modest proposal, a
apply
trial
to-
of about
apply to whom?
30,000 students in the worst performing schools or most overcrowded schools. Would have been a very modest, I forget
much
now,
was it gonna give
about
them?
$4,000 roughly. I don't
Even
know.
though 15,000 is currently being spent in the Chicago public
Well,
schools
see, but
per kid per
ironically,
year.
yes, but ironically, in the private sector schools that are competing, the ones that are already out there,
4,000 goes pretty far.
4,000 goes a long ways and gets you most of your tuition. So the point
And that
is,
lost it
did
passed in
lose.
the state Senate.
Passed in the Senate, in a
Lost in the House.
bipartisan vote. Great credit to all them. Lost in the Illinois House. But the bottom line is, if Rom and Karen Lewis and the new Chicago public school president actually cared about the children, they wouldn't let the public school system have a continuing monopoly. Because for a poor person to get out of that failing system, they have to come up with the money twice. They pay the property taxes through property taxes or rent, and then they pay the tuition.
But Rom likes charter schools. Is that halfway toward the better approach?
Charter
School
schools are a
vouchers?
terrific alternative, and charter schools they operate under the public school system, but they operate out of the collective bargaining agreement. So they can't be
Outside the
unionized.
collective bargaining.
Outside of the collective bargaining agreement, they run independently of the entire infrastructure. Same kids, put in by lottery, same demographics, they're outperforming the kids in the Chicago public schools. What the charter schools prove is the problem isn't Chicago children. They can learn, they can achieve, they can compete. And if you want the Chicago children to learn and compete, you have to set them free by having more charter schools and vouchers and not letting the monopoly continue.
Eric Zorn, Chicago Tribune columnist, frequent guest on this show. Somebody I admire. He's really quite
He's
objective.
a great advocate for his point of view.
Yeah, and he's fairly left of center, but he's actually somebody who follows ideas or tries to their logical conclusion. His ideas on gun control are out of sync with the left. You know, he says this stuff doesn't make sense, so he's fairly conservative on that. But yet on school choice and school vouchers that we've talked about, he says, you know, I show him something like this, Herb Wahlberg's book on school choice, the
Terrific
findings,
book.
put out, I think, by the Heartland Institute. Okay,
Excellent
you've seen it.
organization. Oh yeah, very familiar with
So it goes through 100 pages or so, a lot of findings on charter schools, on school vouchers, on choice. Do they outperform traditional schools? But this is interesting. It's stuck in here as this Barack Obama U.S. Senate. Yes, we can. There you go. So yes, we can, right here.
Yes.
I guess he's saying yes, we can if we had
Yes.
school choice. Well, that's another whole show itself about Barack. But so Zorn says, though, the findings are mixed. Other people could cite findings saying they really don't outperform. What do you say to Eric Zorn? Because you've read a lot of this stuff.
I've read a lot of this stuff, and all the findings that are credible show that you see from marginal to substantial improvement with charter schools. But the bottom line is, what's interesting to me about this is, let's assume charter schools do exist and they're only marginal. Those schools get shut down quickly if they fail, and this has happened. With public schools, they go on generation after generation after generation, destroying kids' lives because they have a monopoly. That is the outrage.
So Rom, if we've got maybe 30,000 students out of the 400,000 in charter schools now in the Chicago public school system, he should be pushing to dramatically increase that to maybe 100,000 students.
Yes, and
at least 100,000 students by the time his term is over. Does that sound reasonable?
That sounds very reasonable. In fact, I think we're going to see a big growth in the number of charter schools.
He's going to push on that, and you support him on that.
Absolutely, and part of the reason for that, the growth in charter schools, not just in Chicago but around the country, around the state rather, is a bill that our Colin Hitt was deeply involved in which liberalizes, in the good sense of the word, the authorizing legislation, so that the school board and a local community does not control the allowance, whether or not to allow a new charter school.
So, and school board sort of is the competitor of the emerging charter school.
School board is the fox controlling the public school hen house.
You don't really want your
They don't want
competitor
another
to
fox in the hen house with them, and that power has now been delegated to others.
So this is all about advancing free market philosophy. Right?
This is about
you're about it. I'm just broadening now, not just in education.
Absolutely, but let me translate that a little differently. What it's about is empowering individuals. We believe individuals, when given the free of choice to make choices for their own life, will overall make better choices than when you concentrate the decision-making power in government. And we think that's been proven over and over and over again. It's not that people don't make mistakes. People make mistakes all the time. I've made monumental mistakes in my life. But overall, in society, you go farther, faster, and improve the human condition more by having people empowered rather than government empowered over people.
But do you believe in completely laissez-faire, or must there be some government rule?
No, I'm not an
both in
anarchist.
regulate-
Of course, there's always a necessity for
Police,
reasonable. Of course, there's
defense,
always the whole point of
education?
government.
Should they be in education?
No, government doesn't even need to be in education technically, but I don't think that era is upon us anytime soon. So the public education system is here to stay as far as in my lifetime. I don't think that's going to change.
So just give them competition so they
but
do
conceptually, you can make this case for most things, but there's no question you don't protect liberty without a good government whose focus is to protect liberty. What's happening now is government, particularly at the local level, is becoming the primary solver of problems as opposed to creating a level playing field that allows people to be empowered and pursue their dreams.
All right, and we're going to continue to speak as the credits roll, but I very much want to
It
thank
always
our
goes so
guest,
fast.
John Tillman. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me.
We'll have you back. And so people can find out, again, more about this by going to
IllinoisPolicy.org, and we have all of our studies there. They can look at all the media.
all the studies. You've got stuff that goes up there daily.
Every day.
And you've got basically executive summaries.
Yeah.
So if
we
people
have what
don't
we
have
call
time to go through
absolutely.
the 40 pages.
We have a one-pager on every report we do. We call it a policy point. It tells you what the policy is, why it matters, and gives you the nuts and bolts very quickly.
Is your view being represented in the public schools that is advancing free markets? You've just got an award for that. You and your
My staff,
the organization
my team,
that
yes,
you
it's a team
at
award,
the Illinois
yes.
Policy Institute.
The Roe Award,
Roe
named
Award.
after Thomas Roe, one of the great fighters for liberty, who's the founder of the State Policy Network. We just came back from our annual conference, and I was happy.
And you got that award, why?
For being an innovator and leader in the broad movement around the country to advance the free market system, because I've focused particularly on the idea of taking what I call a marketing-centric approach, trying to tell a story about policy, how it changes lives at the point of the intersection.
Now, but people say we're in this mess because the free market system was let to roam wild by the prior administration, by the Bush administration.
Well, that's a false
We had
thing.
the crash in 2008.
All false. That was not the free market system's fault. That was bad public policy.
What was the bad public policy?
Inflated the currency, loose money, the Community Reinvestment
Reserve,
Act,
you're
Federal
referring to?
Reserve, yes.
Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac.
Fannie Mae.
Those are government
Let me
institutions.
put it to you this way: if you at home,
They needed more regulation, would you say? The regulators needed more regulation.
that's one way to put it. They were running wild in the system. But basically, if you have a couple of kids at home and you give them an inflated allowance and let them have all kinds of money, do you think they're going to spend all that money wisely, or do you think they're going to start spending that money on things you would not approve of? Whereas you have a limited allowance for your kids, and they have to buy some of their own clothes and some of their own things that they want to have for entertainment, they're going to spend more judiciously if you limit the allowance. If you inflate their allowance, just like what happened in the housing
People
market.
really want this because, again, Governor Quinn announced he was going to give a major tax increase before the election, and he was voted back. He was re-elected or elected after having been
Jeff, as you well know,
succeeded.
elections are about which voters turn out. Mike Madigan did a better job of turning out his voters, particularly in Cook
Saying
County.
democracy doesn't work?
No, I didn't say that at all. What I said is elections are about who turns out their voters, and Republicans didn't do a good job of turning out their voters.
How can that be? 2010 was the major Republican year across the country.
The most powerful man in this state is Mike Madigan. He's got a well-oiled political machine. The Republican
Pat
political
Brady just
apparatus
says on
needs some
TV,
work.
August 28th, he says, Madigan gets it, Cullerton gets it. The problem is Quinn. What do you say to Pat Brady? He's the state GOP chairman.
Well, I'm not going to comment on what Pat